also cryptography. This work was the output of a working group of which I was only a small part. So it's my intention to explain the proposal, the rationale behind it, and also my part in it, and only take my share of the credit, which is not much. Security bugs are always going to be with us. Even if we had formal verification, we'd still have security bugs, so we need some way of dealing with it. All right, hands up if you believe this is true. Crypto means cryptography. Yes, I agree with you. All right, I want to take the depth of feeling that you have for that statement and apply it to this one. Vulnerability and exploit are not interchangeable terms. I'll use them in a sentence for you. While I was security auditing the software, I found a vulnerability. And then later on, I wrote an exploit to exploit it. Okay, if we can't get these two terms right, we're not going to be able to have a sensible discussion. All right, so responsible disclosure already exists, and it fits into a history of dealing with security vulnerabilities. So back in the day when I was first obsessed with software security, the cool thing to do was to keep bugs to yourself, not tell anybody about them, or maybe just tell your friends, which might be nobody. And if you do tell your friends, you do give them exploits, then you get a certain amount of kudos from them. And then a little bit later on, these two mailing lists were created where people were dumping exploits for common pieces of software to get kudos from everybody, under the rationale that if these vendors really cared about security, then they wouldn't have included the security bug in the first place. And then a little bit later, Rainforest Puppy came out with RF policy, and people started working with the vendors in order to tell them ahead of time, and the security fix for the issue could come out before everybody got hold of the exploit, and everybody became a little bit safer online. And then in around about 2009, no more free bugs came about, so if you didn't live through this, Google that and you'll find out more about it. Basically, bug bounties meant that security researchers expected to be paid for their efforts. So the emergent standards for responsible disclosure essentially involve two parties, the researcher and then the vendor, single researcher, single vendor. On the left-hand side here, we have mostly what happens is sort of what happens everywhere. There's a contact detail for the company. It's usually security at. This is straight out of RF policy. And then they work together, and then they release the update. And on the right, we have the same version, but with bug bounties. So adding money to things makes some parts of it better, some parts of it worse, but that's not the subject of this talk. There have been multi-party disclosures where a single researcher is talking to multiple vendors who independently have the same problem. And then there have been some attempts to describe it in a standard, and none of them have really taken off. Now, cryptocurrency is a little bit different than any other space because we've got all of these chains of projects. And even on a single network, there's multiple implementations. And so if you have a security bug that requires a consensus upgrade, then you've got a problem. All right, that's the end of the introduction. If anybody fell asleep because they already knew all of this stuff, now's a good time to wake up because this is going to get a bit more original now. Okay. So yeah, critical issues present big disclosure problems. So in the middle of last year, Person Bcoin asked me to join this working group. And essentially, they realized that onward disclosures are more important, possibly even than the initial disclosure. Once you've found out about a consensus critical security bug, what are you going to do next? And while we were talking about it, exactly that happened to me, and it felt like the sky was falling for a little while for me and for other people working on this. I had to disclose this bug. I was only told about it once Sapling had already activated and the fix was already in Zcash. So my job really was to run the disclosures for it. We were able to hand over a fix to the neighbor that we had already got a vulnerability sharing agreement with, which was Horizon, and create a new sharing agreement in QuickTime with Komodo, and they were able to fix their projects too. And then other projects only found out about it a little bit later on via a full disclosure, which is where we sort of dumped it into the public domain. So it was a mixture of responsible and full disclosure based on market capital. Now then, that experience and an earlier experience from the working group of the Bitcoin inflation bug both went into the standard that I'm about to describe. So this one added experience of disclosing something like this, and this one added experience of disclosing something like this. And then eventually we committed to it, and Bitcoin ABC committed to it. Now then, both of these bugs highlighted the same weaknesses, essentially, in existing responsible disclosure processes. You start asking yourself some big questions. Well, who should we tell? On what basis should we select people to decide who gets to know and who doesn't get to know? We don't want everybody to know about it, because if they know about it, they can, if this gets out, people will exploit it, and then we'll all be sunk. But at the same time, we want as many people to fix as possible, right? So, and what details should we give them? Should we tell them everything about it? Normally in responsible disclosure, you would give full details, and if you've written an exploit, you would include that. But I don't think it's very appropriate here to do that. And finally, should we collect a bug bounty or not? Some of these projects have bug bounty programs, others not. Yeah, it definitely feeds into it. Okay, so as the result of asking and answering those questions under pressure, and then thinking, well, what should we have done, or what could we have done ahead of time to make this easier for ourselves, the group came up with this standard. So I'm not expecting you to read what it says on the right there. Obviously, it's very small text. What I'm trying to get across by including it on this slide is that that's almost the entire document. It's very, very simple, single page, it's freely available, it's really easy to implement. It's just a small amount of preparation that allows you to be much slicker and faster and not be having squabbles about things that perhaps should have been decided ahead of time under pressure of a consensus critical security issue. It's completely backwards compatible with the existing standards, so it includes your contact details, which is your email address, your PGP key. And the idea is that by working together, we can grow a bigger pie for cryptocurrency rather than trying to use this information to fight against each other, right? The last thing we want is people like weaponizing exploits against each other and taking each other's networks out. That's just going to be a load of infighting that's going to be bad for the industry. It's not legally binding unless you want it to be, and then it removes the mandatory bug bounties between parties. You can still pay out if you want to under this standard, but you don't have to. Now then, pre-commitment scheme for voluntary sharing agreements. So it basically says, if this happens, these are the people we're going to tell. And by doing that, we separate out the discussion about who should know from having to actually deal with the bug. When it feels like the sky is falling, you don't really want to be worrying about this kind of thing. And also, given that when this happens, you're going to need to form like a team of people that can update the software that achieves consensus on your network, you may as well be open about it rather than trying to keep it secret. This should be something that you're proud of and that you tell everybody about. Also, it defines or describes, rather, ethical behavior, and then you can pre-commit to some reason that you might want to not act in that particular way, so that you're saying ahead of time that for some reason, some technical reason, this bit of ethical behavior, what's considered to be ethical behavior, doesn't really apply to us. So for instance, for Zcash, we're unlikely to hand over details because of shielded transactions essentially means that a counterfeiting bug, like the one I had to deal with before, that could be exploited without anybody knowing about it. And so we withheld details, and we would probably do that again. It's anxiety-inducing. Sorry about that, Mauricio. I know. Okay, and then the final part is that if everybody were to adopt this, sorry, it maintains pairs, so you're not having to do multi-party disclosures, you're just doing, it's just a network connected of different pairs. So I'm connected to this person through a vulnerability sharing agreement, they're then connected to this person, and so on and so forth. And if we were all to adopt it today, or tomorrow, I guess I'll give you a day, we would be able to map the disclosure surface. And I think that's a useful thing to be able to do, because it really looks like we know what we're doing. And I opened by saying that, by confusing crypto and cryptography. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how we disclose to people about cryptography bugs. One of the things that's not in the standard is we don't prescribe or ask you to pre-commit to who within your organization, within your own organization, you're going to share this stuff with. But of course, So when we did it, we told the 7 scientists quite late. So they're the people that created the technology upon which the original Sprout pool was based. And they were understandably a little bit upset. The response was, well, Ariel, who found the bug, I don't know if you're in the room, nope, he produced a paper describing the flaw, and then the original paper that included the flaw was updated. And it was updated to look like this, and here's the update. Now this one I have included to say, to say that you can't read that bit at the bottom. It's essentially if you were trying to develop a system and you weren't aware that there was an updated version of this paper, and then the update right at the bottom there describes, oh, by the way, a previous version of this paper had a critical vulnerability in it, so you might not want to use it. This is probably academically the right thing to do. I'm just not sure whether it's... Oh, really? Oh, really? Okay. Well, that answers that question. Apparently the right thing to do is to put it in the abstract. But it still doesn't help the alerting situation. So if somebody just has a copy of the old paper and doesn't realize that there's an update, how do we alert those people to know that there is, hello, there's an update available. You should download and install the latest version of this academic paper. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about 3 different ways of organizing in order to responsibly disclose security information, from the most centralized to the least centralized. So there's a list, a centralized list maintained by this person at Trail of Bits. And if your cryptocurrency project is not on there, I suggest that you add it so that people can find you. It's a centralized list, but it's certainly better than not being on that list. Then slightly less centralized than that, this process, this protocol, this proposal has you distributing the authority of, excuse me one second. Distributes the knowledge of who to contact and what the onward disclosures will look like across each one of the projects. Now, my question is, how can we decentralize this further? Because security app for a given project is also kind of a centralized control, even though it's within that one project. So possibly on-chain governance, possibly tied into formal verification. So I'd be interested in what people's thoughts are on that. And so this is where I try and give credit to everybody involved, but this is only a fraction of the people. So I guess the biggest call out is probably for Darren Mills, who also reviewed these slides. Thank you very much. But as you can see, there were a lot of people involved in editing the standard and making it friendly and etc. And then there are other people operating in the space. So MIT's Digital Currency Initiative has a standard out, which is basically you take the... So that standard is really just publish your contact information within your repository. I hope I'm not doing them injury by saying that that's the standard. We're adding to that a little bit. I think that this version, our version, is provides for more openness and transparency. So yeah, here's a call to action. If you're responsible for the security of cryptocurrency software, you should have contact details available, publish that on your website, and of course in your repo. You should form these vulnerability disclosure agreements with your neighboring projects. So that's ones that share code with you and also ones that are operating on your same network. Read this new standard. It doesn't take long. Commit a page to your repo that explains your intention to follow the standard, who your relationships are with, what your contact details are, and what your expected deviations are from the standard. Okay, so in summary, existing disclosure processes are inadequate in the face of a massive security bug in multi-project code with distributed consensus. There's a new standard. It's simple. You can adopt it. You should use it. And then finally, I have 2 questions for you folks. How can we automatically alert projects that are implementing an out-of-date academic paper? And how can the security app function be decentralized further? Questions? Go ahead. Or answers. Please help.
I just wanted, I've done that a few times personally with all the press, but I just wanted to thank you. The way you handle communication, I mean, allowed us to be here, and that's something, but it's also, we also told the space how we should handle this in the future, and it will be the reference. And having as a first priority the existence of this space more than, you know, our own little or big interest. So just wanted to thank you.
No problem. Thank you. And thanks to the rest of the team that worked on this. I did not do this alone, by the way, the disclosure or the standard. So thanks for the disclosure and thanks for the working group.
Where is the standard?
Oh, yeah, it's on GitHub. Did I not link to it?
I don't think you did.
I'll text you afterwards. No, I'll change the slides so that when they go online, it has the link. Hi.
Hi. Do you have any thoughts on how the traditional bug bounty programs run by commercial companies might be less relevant in this space, aside from the decentralization angle?
If they're less relevant in this space? No, I think they're still relevant. The only reason we're not running one is just because it takes a certain amount of resources to run it. I still think they're very relevant.
Do you have plans to use some of the GitHub's new security tools that they released like a month ago? I added that.
Yeah, that's an interesting question actually, because there were some emails went back and forth just before we were ready to go full disclosure and tell the remaining of the effective projects. Did I email you? Oh, okay.
I brought that up.
Oh, okay. All right, great. Yes, I think we're going to use it if it makes sense for us to use it. I haven't. I think the latest things didn't quite fit with this, just because of the amount of cash that's dependent on us getting the fixes right. But we can talk about that after, definitely. Yeah.
All right, so I'm fascinated by that thing where you put in an update that fixes a vulnerability under a false pretense, like you make it look like it's a patch to something else, but actually it patches a huge vulnerability without notifying anyone of that. It seems like that's happening more. I don't even know exactly the phrase from that. I think I learned most about that from Bitcoin Core doing that several times, but I think it's now become more commonplace. And so now every time I see a patch that I don't understand, I'm like, oh, there's probably a really cool vulnerability in there. That explains why this patch doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah, so the patch for Zcash to fix this counterfeiting bug, excuse me, was also a 2 times performance increase. So that was really a pretty easy sell that I believe Zuko made. How many security updates improved the performance by 2 times? The answer is just that one. Yeah, in general, you don't want it to get out, right? It's true. When there's this much cash staked on a bug and not knowing about how to exploit it and where the problems are. Oh, hang on 1 second. Sorry. When there's this much, I thought you were telling me about time. No. When there's this much cash staked on it, you don't want it to get out. So yes, I mean, it does feel intuitively kind of bad that somebody should be able to update the software in some sort of underhanded or duplicitous way. I think the fight to try to make that as open a process as possible includes pre-committing to who else you're working with in order to upgrade network consensus. And I think that's so far as open and transparent as we can make that process.
Hey, I actually have a question.
Go ahead.
Thanks for the talk. What would you say the right procedure should be in case you responsibly disclose a bug, but there is no reaction from the other side? How long should you wait?
Oh, right, yeah. So the standard mentions that, and generally with responsible disclosure, 90 days is a sort of accepted deadline. Of course, when you're doing a consensus upgrade, you need a certain amount of time to do that, but I personally feel like we should get that time down. If something leaks, or if you get an external vulnerability report from a researcher, you're relying on them to stay quiet about it until you fixed it. When you're staking this much money, I mean, you want to fix it in less than 90 days. I mean, surely fewer than 90 days is the right way to go. Yeah, it's the same problem with all other companies, organizations, tech, every area. 90 days sounds like a lot, but once you're inside and you're trying to operate the levers and get people to do things and reassign tasks, it's actually quite a short amount of time.